All right. Today we're going to be talking about geophytes. If you know any Latin at all, most people know geo, ground, and phyte, lover. So these are ground lovers. What geophytes are, in a botanical sense, is plants that have an underground storage system. And really, most plants have an underground storage system of sorts. That's why perennials can go dormant, and that crown there is underground. But when we're talking about geophytes, we're really talking about plants that have a larger, more robust storage system. So, the obvious ones that we all know are spring bulbs like daffodils and tulips, or onions that you eat, carrots, beets, all of those kinds of things that have that large storage organ. Now, many of the ones that we grow in the garden come from areas where, at least for part of the year, it can be very difficult, often very dry. In some cases, very cold, but usually places that have very much seasonal variations in rainfall. And so the underground storage organ is really there so that during dry seasons they can survive. Now, does anybody know where kind of the three regions where most of the bulbs that we grow in the garden come from? So Mediterranean, and especially, and this is all around the Mediterranean. When we hear Mediterranean being very Eurocentric, we think of the north side of the Mediterranean. But the north side of the Mediterranean, and then the south side and into the Middle East, going there. A lot of our tulips and crocus and things like that grow in the mountains of the Middle East. When if you know the lilies of the field, those really aren't lilies so much as a lot of other flowering bulbs that are in that Middle East region. Where else? Anybody? So they're one of the few groups of plants that really do well for us from the southern hemisphere. We really struggle with a lot of the plants from the southern hemisphere, but a lot of our bulbs come from, well, Mexico, which is not Mexico, Central America, and down into South America. We have a lot of luck with plants from places like Paraguay and Uruguay and southern Brazil in our area, and we don't have a lot of success with a lot of the other plants from there. And then South Africa. A lot of our plants come from, a lot of our bulbs, geophytes, come from South Africa. And then, of course, there's Asian and North American ones as well. But that's where a lot of them come from. And that's because they grow in places that can be very tough for plants to grow in. So we're going to go up to our geophyte border and start looking at plants. We've got one group of plants that are in full flower up there, but there's a lot happening there, and there's a lot that kind of people don't necessarily think of as geophytes up there. So, as always, please ask questions any point. I love talking about plants, so you don't have to wait and ask about the things that I'm talking about. You can ask about other plants as well. We'll probably stop a couple times and talk about some other geophytes on our way up to the border. So follow me. All right. This, from about here down to the stones you see at the end, this is our geophyte border. Most gardens, if they have something like this, they call it a bulb border. A bulb border, only covers part of it. We believe in being as accurate as possible and also not dumbing things down and talking about geophytes rather than bulbs, because geophytes are bulbs, corms, tuberous roots, plants with storage rhizomes, thick underground roots. So it kind of covers a lot of different areas. Bulbs are what you think of when you think of an onion or a tulip, daffodil. Those are kind of the typical bulbs that you see. You know, the difference between a sweet potato and a you know, Idaho potato. The sweet potato is a tuberous root. It does not have any growing points on it. Excuse me, it's a sweet potato is a tuber. I'll go the other way there. Potato is a tuberous. Am I getting this wrong? I'm getting it wrong. Right. Sweet potatoes are tuberous roots. They are just roots. Whereas a potato is a tuber. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused here. Is a tuber, and that's why with seed potatoes you cut them up and you plant them. Anything with an eye will grow. It has growing points all over it, so it's really a stem, technically, rather than the tuberous root that a sweet potato is. You can cut a sweet potato up, it isn't all going to grow. It's got one growing point on it. So just like a typical root would be. But they're both storage organs as far as we're concerned. And it's easier to talk about plants that we know, vegetables and things. And that's why all those with the carrots, the beets, the radishes that I mentioned, those are all roots. Those are tuberous roots, swollen roots. This really looks good year round, believe it or not. There are bulbs that will flower just about all times of the year. Now, we don't think about winter as a time for bulbs and other geophytes often, but there is a lot that looks good. And one of the great ways you can grow geophytes is by layering them. People do that in containers. They call it, lasagna gardening, where you have the very early and winter flowering bulbs. They used to be called minor bulbs, but I've had two people correct me on that. One, Brent Heath, co-owner of Brent and Becky's Bulbs, who is an expert, and he says very passionately, there are no minor bulbs. They are all important. They're just smaller. So no minor bulbs. I learned my lesson. I was called out in public when we were speaking at somewhere together. And the other person, NC State, had one of the most important bulb experts in the world here. He wrote the textbook. It was like this. And that was Dr. Gus Hertog. And he was so pleased when he saw our sign that said bulbs, corms, tubers, enlarged hypocotyls, and all these different, geophyte things. It wasn't until the sign was made that I learned what plant has an enlarged hypocotyl, which is cyclamen. So kind of a odd thing there, but he was a real expert, and he was another one who said there's no such thing as minor bulbs. He mostly worked with the Dutch bulb industry in terms of bulbs for tulips and ornamental onions and daffodils and those sorts of things, forcing times and all of that for cut flower trade. So I'm just going to point out a few things around me right now. One, as you look down, what you see mostly in color right now are dahlias. And people who move here from up north think of dahlias as these annual plants, something you dig up and clean off and store for the winter and then plant back out. They are perfectly perennial for us, most of the garden dahlias. They will grow just fine. And in fact, most of these are really seedlings of what we planted originally. So we planted them in 2008, I believe it was, shortly after I arrived here, and we've allowed them to seed around a bit to get this color. And for us, dahlias really like it cooler, and they like short days. So they flower really well in the spring, and then we really cut them back. They get pretty raggedy looking, and we cut them back, and then they come back up and look really good now. Now they'll put flowers out all summer long, but really they're at their best if you do cut them back. Things, we think of things with these strappy-like leaves as, for most of our bulbs and geophytes. And there are a lot of them. If yesterday hadn't been a holiday, we probably would have put irrigation on this, and you would have seen a lot of these little guys up front, which are the rain lilies, in flower. Rain lilies, a lot of them grow in the Southwest. They grow in Texas, Mexico, Central America, and as the name implies, they flower when it rains. So in areas where there isn't a lot of rainfall, they kind of do their thing, and then boom, they flower every time it rains. For us, that means they'll rain most of the summer. Every time we get moisture, they'll start flowering again. So they can be very, very long lasting. It's one of the plants I use in my garden to really give me kind of that continual color over the summer. Another one that's important and doesn't have those strappy leaves are calla lilies. Calla lilies grow from a tuber, and they can be, they are long-lived plants. It's one of the few plants in my garden. I moved into a house about 5 years ago and ripped everything out. The calla lilies keep coming up. I put on about 4 feet of soil and mound over where they were, and they've come up through there after a couple of years. And I quietly try and get rid of them. It was our wedding flower, and so my wife thinks I planted them for her. I keep getting rid of them just because they keep spreading. But great plants, and a lot of the bulbs are long lasting like that, are very tough. A lot of these geophytes, like calla lilies, but I'm standing between a couple that are that if you want to plant that will last and last and last, you plant crinums. I know people say that there's no such thing as a dead crinum. You can't kill them. Sometimes they get shaded out, sometimes they get stuff dumped on them, but when you clear it out, boom, they pop back up. So got one crinum lily in flower right here. You see the big pink trumpet-shaped flowers. That's a crinum. We have these big patches, and we would probably offer these like in our giveaways and things more often, except we can't afford all the shovels that will break when you're digging these things out. They are, they're there for life, and they can form great big, huge bulbs, really enormous. And they really are easy plants. I'm a big believer in, I don't like things looking shaggy in my home garden. So when things start getting a little ratty, I cut them all the way to the ground, let them come back up. I do that with the callas. I do that with crinums, things like that, and let them come up. But these are something that what's that? How often should you divide the rain lilies? In my experience, rain lilies won't choke. They'll keep flowering. They'll get dense and dense, and that's a lot of some bulbs like daffodils they'll stop flowering over time, and that's because they either get shaded out or they get crowded out, and you've got to divide them. And then there are others that just don't seem to mind. Actually, some that seem to really like being crowded. That's agapanthus likes being crowded, and the rain lilies don't have any problem with it, but you can divide them whenever. Now, one thing that I always learned, was taught with bulbs, is you divide them once they go dormant. Wait till they go dormant and divide them then. I was talking with Nancy Goodwin at Montrose, which if you haven't visited Montrose in Hillsborough when it's open, you should definitely do that. And she said, no, absolutely wrong. You move your bulbs around while they're in green. And she was moving her winter bulbs, her snowdrops and things, in green. She'd dig them up, divide them, plant them out, and she knows what she's doing. She's got a lot of snowdrops and some other, especially winter and early spring bulbs. And that was kind of a revelation to me. I felt that way about some things like the beardless iris. I always divide those right after they flower. But I'd never thought about with these other bulbs, which means I never divide them because I'm always waiting for them to go dormant. And then by the time they're dormant, I either forget where they are or else I'm like, I'll deal with it next year. So really pretty easy. one of the groups you'll see through here, throughout here, these stalks with the leaves all the way around them. These are lilies. These are the Formosan lilies, which are big and gorgeous trumpets, white trumpets, very fragrant. They form a lot of seed, and all of it will germinate. It's one of the 3 or 4 worst weeds in my garden because they've seeded all through my garden. And so you see we pop those seed heads off, which is unfortunate because they're kind of nice when they turn brown and open up. But we do get those out. I love species lilies. I grow a lot of them. I never see them flower because the rabbits like them even more than me. And man, they nip them off and frustrates me every time. I never do anything about it. An interesting group of geophytes are these Sinningias. And these come from these come from South America mostly. These are in the African violet family. They don't look much like it, but they are. They're Gesneriaceae, and some of you may have heard our horticulturist Tim Alderton talk about gesneriads on our midweek program. A lot of different type of gesneriads. Many of them aren't geophytes, but these Sinningias from South America are, and they can form massive tubers. I actually had some that were lifting all my other plants out of the soil. When I dug them up, the tubers were easily a foot across, just huge. And you can kind of divide them up when they're like that and spread them around. But beautiful plants, easy to propagate from cuttings, but they'll also spread as well. And hummingbirds love them, absolutely love them. Yes, you can cut that tuber, spread it around. So it's a true tuber. So it has a lot of growth points on there.
Does it have a dormant season?
Yes, most of these will be dormant in winter. So they will go back to the ground. Now we'll have the foliage from crinums. And then what you don't see in here are all the winter and spring bulbs that pop up, all the little crocuses and scillas and a lot of those little blue and white and pale pink flowered things that are so lovely. And everybody, those little, not minor bulbs, but smaller bulbs, everybody should grow them because you always have room, because under like deciduous shrubs, think things like butterfly bush and perennials that go dormant, you can always plant them right around there. I see people planting these little bulbs in open spaces, and I'm like, well, only do that if you're going to plant on top of them, because they'll come up and look pretty, and then other things will pop up as they're going dormant. So you don't have that ugly foliage that's going dormant. You just have good looking stuff. And move down and talk about a little plant over here. So down here we have a plant, and people think sometimes this is a surprise lily or hurricane lily or naked lady. It's actually a different plant. This is what's commonly known as an oxblood lily, Rhodophylla bifida. The typical form is deep saturated red. This is variety Spathacia, which is this really nice pink. These Rhodophylla come up this time of year, look beautiful. They're like the surprise lilies. They have foliage. The foliage comes up after it flowers for them and will look good through most of the winter. These are a little bit harder to find in the trade, but if you go to specialty bulb places, you can get them. We should have some red ones in bloom. They overlap a little bit, but these come up just a wee bit earlier than the others.
That's a wide strapping thing behind you. Is that another crinum?
This is another crinum. Excuse me, I'm sorry, this is Hymenocallis. I'm glad you pointed that. Hymenocallis tropical giant, not too tropical because it does well for us. See, it stays a little bit cleaner than some of the crinums. Hymenocallis range all the way from here in North Carolina down through the islands and Central and South America. And they were sometimes called spider lilies. They've got kind of the crinum-like flower, but then each of the tips of the petals goes out beyond that. Some of them really want a wet spot. There are some of our native ones that will only grow in moving water. They're just about impossible to grow, even in still water. They want water that's moving past them. But others are very easy to grow, very prolific, very much like crinums when you try and dig them out. They're not as well known as the crinums are, but they are great garden plants. Some are a little more shy to bloom than the crinums, which is the big problem with them.
And you called the pink.
Few different kind of different types of geophytes, and like I said, geophytes can be defined in a lot of different ways in terms of what is and is not a geophyte. But here we have a peony. You know, peonies, if you order peonies bare root, or, you know, you get them wholesale from, say, they are this cluster, it's a crown, but with thick kind of tuberous roots. Looks kind of like a, I don't know, big fat spidery looking thing. When you get bulbs like this, when you get things that aren't like tulip bulbs, sometimes it's hard to tell what's the right side up, and peonies are one of those. I have twice now been to nurseries where they were starting to grow peonies wholesale. They had planted out several hundred of them and couldn't figure out why they were failing with basically all of them. It's because they planted them upside down. Because the roots on some of these will come out closer to the top than the bottom. And so if you're not 100% sure what's the right side up on your bulb, plant them sideways. I sometimes plant them sideways anyway, because some bulbs have kind of a dimple on the top, if you will, they're concave on top, and I don't want them to hold water that first year and before they get settled. I don't want it to kind of sit. So I'll plant them sideways or at an angle. One that people get mixed up all the time is on planting right side up are cyclamen. All the roots come around from right around the top and will come over. So if you get a cyclamen with roots on it, it looks like you should plant it upside down because it's nice and smooth on the bottom, and so people flip it the wrong way. So that's one that I always tell people to plant sideways just to be sure. Another one I was just moving yesterday, in fact, in my garden, are the Japanese ground orchids, Platyllus striata, which is a little geophyte there. We don't think of orchids necessarily as geophytes, but some of the hardy orchids are. And I was dividing those. I was looking at them and really seeing that they kind of look like you should be planting them wrong side up as well. The roots come out from the top. And what you can look for on them is there's kind of a little papery sheath that comes up that even when the stem's gone, you can kind of see that. But they definitely kind of look like upside down. Yeah.
Why send the roots out the top?
Why would a plant send the roots out the top? Well, you know, I'm not entirely sure. Some geophytes will kind of pull themselves down. And so those roots are kind of helping kind of anchor it, not necessarily move it down, but keep it from floating up, if you will. But I'm not entirely sure why that's what they do, or why.
There has to be a reason.
So this is an evolutionary thing. There's a lot of times there's a reason. Sometimes there was a reason, and it wasn't detrimental to an organism, and so it never lost that. But I don't know. We need Gus de Hertog here. He could probably tell us in very, very detailed way what that is. A couple other geophytes that you may not think of are the ginger lilies, hedychiums. If you dig those up, they've got the big, thick roots, those thick rhizomes, and will spread. This is a variegated one called Dr. Moy. There's another one very similar called Vanilla Ice. Great plants. They're in this area, they really like a little bit of shade, but not too much shade or else they won't flower. So you get them in a spot where they get a little bit of protection from afternoon sun. You won't get so much browning around the edges. I have basically switched all my growing anywhere where I want that kind of look away from canna lilies, which are another geophyte, because canna lilies get those leaf rollers so bad that I can't stand growing them anymore. So I've gotten rid of them, and I just use ginger lilies instead. They don't start flowering as early, but they're more fragrant too. Yeah, that's another Crinum, the one with kind of the purple flushed foliage on there. There are a few of them. This maybe is sangria. I'd have to get back there and look. But yeah, you know, you can get that variation in color. It's funny, the most popular, most widely grown Crinum, it seems like, the one I see for sale and see in people's gardens is one called White Queen, which people who garden a lot with Crinum sometimes call floppy white, because the flower stem always kind of lays on the ground and then goes up. And so I don't know why that's the one. Maybe it's easier to dig. I know I dig it out and get rid of it because it's floppy, you know, and I want flower stalks that stand up nice and straight. You can get that purple foliage. A lot of these, like I said, these dahlias are seedlings, but there are several series, but what these were planted from were the Bishop series. Started with Bishop of Landolph, which was a really nice red with purple foliage. There's others in that same series that have that purple foliage, and now there are newer ones that are smaller. You know, everybody wants things small and compact, but you can see if you just let them go, they'll really you get a lot of variety. You get some doubles and things. This is one that's probably, yeah, this is Maxi Tampico. So this is not a seedling. It's double.
What kind of soil?
For these, not a whole lot. This has been kind of an empty bed for a while before we planted it. We put in some compost and some permatil. Expanded slate and tilled it all in. But bulbs are pretty accommodating. Brent Heath really likes to tell people to go in and, you know, put down compost and till it in and get soil nice, put all your bulbs in, and then just dump sand on the top of it. He's like, they don't care what's on top of them. They like the drainage that sand gives them, and their roots go down, and so they grow up just fine through that. I just put them in whatever I'm gardening in, and I put them in some tough spots, because remember, a lot of them grow in really tough spots. In fact, there's some that really want to be in basically baked, dry soil. That's how they grow in the Middle East, some of those, where they really like putting them between paving stones in full sun is actually beneficial for them, because they do want to bake. I have my first vole this weekend. I went in, and actually it was an Oxalis like this, a different one called Oxalis bowiei with a big pink flower, and I was weeding around it and pulled up a big chunk of it, and then I remembered my dogs had been sniffing around it, and I found that vole hole. Got one of those little light 'em up, you know, I don't know what it does, but it looks like a little piece of dynamite that you shove down in the hole and cover it up. And y'all see Caddyshack? Kind of felt like Bill Murray in that. These are Oxalis. They're sold as shamrocks. People grow them indoors as house plants. I remember, you know, my mom used to grow them as house plants. I used to like they're real tart, real tart. But they grow fine for us, both the green and the purple. They can spread quite well. Some people don't like them that way. They're pretty easy to get out though, but you'll leave pieces in and they'll stay in. Real easy to get out if you have voles, apparently. So, you know, the breeding is always trying to get small. People want these little tiny dahlias, but there are big dahlias. This is a dahlia right here that's as tall as the crepe myrtle here. It'll keep getting taller, and then it will flower with small, beautiful pink flowers, like the day that you're going to get your first frost that night. And so you better enjoy it for that day, because it's a sure sign that there's going to be a frost. You know, they can be a little bit floppy. You can see we're always having to cut out pieces because they'll flop over when you get bad weather. And, you know, like I said, the flowers are not in proportion to the size. They're much smaller. I like to, with some of these things that get really big like this, I'll cut it back pretty hard in my garden in, you know, around sometimes twice, sometimes in early June and then again in mid-July. And it'll put up more stalks. It won't get nearly as tall. It'll only get about 5 or 6 feet tall, and still flowers about the same time. So I still, you know, get one day of flowers usually.
And here those stalks almost look like bamboo.
The
leaves don't.
They do look like bamboo. It does die back to the ground. So it's not like bamboo. It's semi-woody. It's easy to cut out. That's why they flop and break like that. It's not woody like bamboo. It's still fairly herbaceous. So yeah, they're from Mexico, these giant dahlias, and I'd be interested to see exactly what habitat they're in that, you know, allows them to grow like this so well. But there are a couple of species like this, but they're very cool. So the pink flowers with the long throats, this is another one of the Sinningias, like I showed down there. This is one called Arkansas Bells. And God, these hybrid Sinningias are so nice. They flower for a long, long period. The foliage stays clean as can be. They are super, super drought tolerant. Hummingbirds love them. They bulk up into nice plants really well. You know, this one, if we dug it out, the central tuber is probably, you know, 18 inches across. Just really, really easy plants to grow. And like I said, the hummingbirds love them. I've planted a bunch in some sunny spots in my garden, just because my wife likes, you know, bird watching, and so gets the hummingbirds. But it flowers almost all summer.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the Arkansas one.
This is Arkansas Bells.
Bells.
And there are quite a few good ones. Bananas Foster, and I can't remember them all. Georgia Peach. You can see there's another one down at the end with kind of lighter flowers down there. My favorite resource, well, Brent and Becky's are great, especially for the smaller bulbs and then the tulips and daffodils. Telos, T-E-L-O-S, Telos Rare Bulbs is a great resource. Mentioned Open Gardens with Plant Delights Nursery, Juniper Level Botanic Garden. They're a great source for some of the more oddball things. That's where many of these Sinningias came from. Oh gosh, there's another great place for bulbs, and Terra Sierra. I have not used them in a long time, not for any particular reason, just haven't. But yeah, they were always good. Odyssey bulbs, another great one, yeah. Was there another one I heard? That's right, yeah. Montrose, Nancy Goodwin. She sells mostly Galanthus and Cyclamen are her big ones, but those are both good. And every winter there is at Pine Knot Farms, which is here in North Carolina, where they sell hellebores. They usually, at their hellebore open house, they have somebody, John Lonsdale, and he grows really kind of unusual cyclamen, foliage-formed ones, and unusual snowdrops, Galanthus, and some other bulbs. They're pricey and little. Teeny things. They're good though, yes. You can see, if we come down here, you can see the typical oxblood lily, the red that you would normally get. Slowly. Yeah, they do multiply, but slowly. All right, who knows what this is? Not an aster.
It's asparagus.
It's asparagus. Asparagus. There are so many asparagus beyond our edible ones. But you know, if you've grown asparagus, it's got a nice big base. You can take, kind of where I go with geophytes is you can take that storage organ and kind of, set it on the table for, a while, a month, and plant it later and it'll grow again. Case of crinums, you can do it for about 6 months on the table. But a lot of different asparagus out there, not all edible. Well, anything's edible if you try hard enough, but this one is this vining one, and a lot of them are do vine like this. There's another one somewhere on that side, right back there. Yeah, that wants to climb a tree. I have one at my house that grows about 25, 30-foot long stems that want to climb up everything. But this is an ornamental one. It has these really pretty small white flowers. And it'll be covered in them, and then followed by these red fruits, which is kind of really nice. In the fall, it'll go kind of, russet, orangey brown, and then we usually cut it back, and, it'll do this again the next year. This one's pretty soft. A lot of asparagus will have kind of thorns on them, and that is so that they all are or many of them are what we'd call scandent subshrubs, that kind of thing, where scandent means they're kind of floppy. They don't know whether they want to be a shrub or a vine. But if they get to where they can climb something like this little tutor or a low branch tree, they will climb it and get up in the tops of it. It's like, if you know Eleagnus, autumn olive, it's a shrub. It's a shrub. If you have a tree over it and it sends one of those long shoots up and it gets into that tree, all of a sudden it forms more thorns that kind of hook back so it can hang on, and it'll climb up, 40 feet into a tree. But we think of them as a shrub. Pineapple lilies, always fun plants. This is it in seed. In flower, it's very similar though, but you can see why it gets the name pineapple lily, because it looks like a pineapple. Kind of an interesting plant in that you can take a leaf, and as long as you remember what side's up, you can take it and you can stick it in soil and root them and make new plants that way. There are more plants than we know of that can do that, and it just takes a little bit of experimenting to do it. There are purple-leafed ones, and most of them have white, greenish white flowers that then will form these seed heads, which is one of the really nice things about pineapple lilies is they come up, they flower, and then the seed heads continue looking good. So you have this really long period. They also, as a cut flower, last really long time. In fact, some of our best garden ones, pineapple lilies, were developed as cut flowers, and the cut flower industry and the landscape industry don't talk to each other. They're different plants completely, but some of their plants work great for us and vice versa. One of my favorites is one called Reuben, which has green foliage but then pink flowers, and I think it's very, very striking. I like it better than the purple leaf ones. So kind of, get you down towards the end here. You can see some more Sinningias. Dahlias. We do have some canna lilies. I mentioned cannas in terms of the leaf rollers. If you want to grow cannas, you want that wider leaf, you want that look, and you don't want leaf rollers, go for the species. They're not quite as showy in flower, but this is a hybrid Canna compacta by Canna patens. But they will, you can see they've got basically no leaf roller damage. If you look at the other cannas in the garden, they will have a lot of leaf roller problems. So those are ones that I like. We have any questions about geophytes? Anything I talked about? Anything I didn't talk about?
Do you have if you get it?
So if I get leaf roller, here's what I do. It's very hard to do any kind of chemical on there because they roll that leaf up. You have that waxy leaf that sheds liquid on there. What I do is cut them to the ground, bag it up, get rid of the foliage. Don't compost at your yard. Get rid of it, and they'll pop back up. We have a Hummer over there. They'll pop back up pretty quickly. You'll get them again, and you can just do it again. But yeah, they just look so ugly when you have them. If you got a pond with fish in it, you can pick them out and throw them to the fish. Your plant will still look ugly, but it'll make you feel better.
In a dry area, moist area?
No, rain lilies, the Zephyranthes that you see all along here, they are native to very, very dry areas for the most part. Now, not our native. We have a native here, the Adamasco lily. That's a Zephyranthes. It really wants a more moist soil, but otherwise, no, dry soils are fine. They just won't flower unless they get rain or irrigation. But yeah, that's fine. In fact, the most widely grown bulb that I've ever seen around the world is the white flowered Zephyranthes candida. And one of the nice things about it is I could probably go along here and pick out the Zephyranthes candida without a flower on it because it has the foliage stays nice and dark green all the time. And it spreads well. But I see that, I've seen it in South America, Asia, North America, New Zealand. People grow it all over the place.
But they want as much sun as you can give them?
They want sun, yeah. Now, one of the things that is not happening in here right just yet, that is starting to happen out in the garden are the surprise lilies, like the oxblood lily, but the lycoris. Those are popping up all over around here, and they're flowering right now. And those are another one where you get that bare stalk with flowers, and then it either puts out foliage after it flowers and looks good for the winter, or it puts out foliage in the spring, comes up, photosynthesizes, dies back, and then the flower comes up. But that's one way to distinguish it, is whether they put their leaves up in the fall or spring. And please don't ask me which one does which, because I can't remember. I'm on to other things when the foliage is up, once it stops flowering. How do you fight rust on the dahlias? Best way to fight rust on the dahlias is after they flower in the spring, cut them all down. I'm a big believer in just get rid of it when it gets ugly. It'll put out some foliage and it won't flower much for the summer, but then they'll be beautiful in the fall and not have as much rust because they won't have as much foliage. Plants are easy. They don't, you know, people, I always tell people that the experts, see, I'm not selling you plants for the most part. The people who sell you plants or sell you plant care, you know, helping you garden, they like to make it all sound difficult. Or people who want to sound like they know something you don't, make it sound difficult. Plants are easy. You get them in the right spot and they'll grow.
That's the key.
Get them in the right spot. You know, one way to grow bulbs is underutilized. Like we have a big perennial border. And really that whole border should be underplanted with winter and early spring flowering bulbs and other plants like hellebores and things like that, so that you have a show in late winter, and then everything grows up around them. And a lot of these bulbs do, like I said, they have a dry period. So these early spring bulbs, think of those where they grow, that's when they're getting moisture, is winter into spring. And then it gets dry. So if you have them planted among other plants during the summer, those other plants are sucking up all the water and keeping those bulbs from rotting out. I should mention, because I brought up tulips several times, there's not any to look at now, but tulips, you know, are not really perennial for us. They come up, they flower. They really need a long cold period that we don't have. And they'll come back sometimes, but they don't flower, or they flower right at the ground, and then they don't flower the next year, and then they disappear. The tulip, if you want to grow a tulip, grow the lady tulips. Tulipa clusiana, and those are sometimes called the candy cane tulips because they have white brushing on the outside of the petals, and I mean red, and then they're white as they open up. Not quite as wide and cup-shaped as the hybrid tulips, but a little more pointed and upright. I think actually prettier in terms of just form. And then there are some like Cynthia and variety Chrysantha, which are yellow instead of white with that same red, and are really beautiful. Tubergen's Gem is another one. And those are the ones to look for. Those will not only perennialize, or not only return, but they will perennialize. They'll get bigger clumps of them. They'll look better and better every year. Yeah, I don't think of the lady tulips getting eat much. Rabbits, yeah. Squirrels, after you plant them, squirrels will come through and dig every one of them up. Up in the trees. I've seen tulips blooming in crotches of trees before. Only once. They only bloom once, and then they're done.
Narcissus.
Great question. So foliage, as it starts to die, like narcissus and other things, when it's about depending on who you talk to, a quarter, a third, a half dead, cut it off. It's not really photosynthesizing much anymore. Then it's drawing its nutrients back down. I usually, like I said, I don't like stuff looking all raggedy. So unless something's growing over it and hiding it, I cut it off easily by the time it's halfway dead.
Because when I hit something.
So, how do you plant these multiple different things all in the same bed? You can do it all at once. I mean, you got to be a better planter than me, and or have more money. No, I just dig in there. No. So if you have bulbs down and you're digging in there and you split bulbs, more often than not, you'll have two plants. Both will grow if they both have part of the basal plate, say on a daffodil. But no, plants are so resilient. And same thing with perennials. You dig through those, a clump of those, usually they'll just divide just fine. Like, so sometimes when I do that and I have a chunk that I'll pull it out and put it somewhere else or give it to somebody. Other times I'll just leave it where it is. But plants are very resilient. So just go right on through them.
Is that what they mean?
So the question is amaryllis bulbs. If they've bloomed well for a couple of years and then stopped, what do you do? Yeah, you can divide them. Although they're one of the ones that really typically likes to be kind of compacted. Maybe that they need fertilizer. Maybe that sometimes, other things grow and you don't realize how shady an area's gotten. And those are the big things. Remember something like an amaryllis, it doesn't have a big root system. Some of these geophytes do, some don't. But if it really uses up all the nutrients around it, and you're not adding any nutrients via compost or fertilizer, it can just run out of what it needs to really flower. So it may be, if you use a bulb booster, bloom booster type fertilizer, or just compost on it, which is what we do here is compost.
You spread compost a certain time of year, or do you do it all throughout?
Well, we do it two ways. One, we do actual compost sometimes in some areas. More often, we just mulch with partially decomposed leaves. And something like this, we do it during winter because right now it'd be hard to get in there and do it. In winter, it's a little more open. All right. Well, great questions.
So if we came in winter, would all this be cut down?
Well, if you came in winter, would all this be cut down? No, a lot of the crinums will be up. Most of the dahlias would be, a lot of the Zephyranthes will be up still. If it hadn't gotten too cold, some of the Oxalis will be up.
But don't they start to, like the Oxalis will turn to mush
when it gets really cold? So, yeah, I mean, this is a lot barer then, but actually, there's pretty good structure with the with the crinums and Hymenocallis in here. If it gets really cold, we'll cut those back. But yeah, and then we have other bulbs under here that'll be popping up. So you know, muscari, they'll be popping up through here soon. Those are a plant that people often recommend to plant with your other bulbs because you get the foliage all winter, and so you know where your bulbs are by that. I say plant your bulbs under other stuff that's deciduous or perennial. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Enjoy the garden.